She dared to mock Clint Eastwood, thinking he was a nobody. But with one phone call, the entire room froze. What happened next? A brutal reality check she'd never forget. The Prime Steakhouse in Beverly Hills, California, was a place of luxury, where Hollywood elites dined under golden chandeliers, sipping on aged wine. The restaurant's ambiance screamed exclusivity, attracting celebrities, CEOs, and socialites who expected flawless service. On this particular Friday night, the atmosphere buzzed with conversations, laughter, and the clinking of fine china. Jessica Reynolds, a 25-year-old aspiring actress, worked tirelessly as a waitress, though she despised the job. In her mind, she belonged in front of cameras, not carrying trays for the rich and famous. She had been at Prime Steakhouse for over a year, yet she viewed each shift as a temporary inconvenience rather than an opportunity. That night, frustration bubbled beneath her practiced smile. Demanding customers, endless special requests, and rude remarks had already drained her patience. Worse, her manager, Mr. Carter, was hovering, watching her every move, making sure she didn't slip up. Then, as the night seemed to reach peak chaos, an elderly man in worn-out jeans, dusty boots, and a faded flannel shirt stepped inside. Jessica barely glanced at him, assuming he had wandered into the wrong place. She had no idea this seemingly ordinary customer was about to change her life forever. The moment the elderly man stepped into Prime Steakhouse, Jessica barely acknowledged him. She was too busy attending to high-profile guests. Hollywood directors, influencers flaunting their designer outfits, and tech billionaires discussing their latest ventures. The man, dressed in worn-out jeans, dusty boots, and a flannel shirt, seemed completely out of place among the glamorous crowd. With an uninterested sigh, Jessica glanced at the reservation list. His name wasn't there. Of course it isn't, she thought, rolling her eyes. He walked confidently to an exclusive VIP booth, a section usually reserved for Hollywood A-listers and power brokers. Jessica exchanged a smirk with a coworker. "Does this guy even know where he is?" she whispered, chuckling. After a few moments, she reluctantly made her way to his table. "Sir, I think you may have the wrong restaurant," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. The old man simply smiled, his sharp blue eyes studying her with quiet amusement. "I'd like a medium rare steak and a glass of water," he said calmly. Jessica frowned. "No wine? No extravagant orders? This man clearly didn't belong. Are you sure?" she asked, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "Our steaks are quite expensive." The man chuckled softly. "I think I can handle it." Annoyed, Jessica scribbled the order and stomped away, muttering, "Another cheap customer wasting my time." She had no idea she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Jessica returned with the man's steak, balancing the plate with one hand while scrolling through her phone with the other. Without much care, she slammed the dish onto the table, causing the silverware to rattle. "Here you go," she said flatly, barely looking at him. The old man nodded, thanking her politely, but Jessica had already turned away. She didn't bother asking if he needed anything else. Why waste time on someone who clearly wasn't going to tip well? She strutted back toward the bar, whispering to her coworker, "He ordered the cheapest steak on the menu. Bet he leaves nothing but pocket change." They both laughed, exchanging smug glances. As she continued waiting on high-profile guests, she noticed something odd. The old man wasn't in a rush to eat. He slowly cut into his steak, observing the restaurant with quiet interest. He seemed completely at ease, unaffected by the bustling crowd or the dismissive way Jessica had treated him. Occasionally, he looked in her direction, not in a creepy way, but with a gaze that made her feel as if she were being studied. It was unnerving. Jessica decided to put on a little show. As she walked past his table, she deliberately sighed, rolled her eyes, and muttered loudly enough for others to hear. People should know when they don't belong. A few customers at nearby tables chuckled, fueling her arrogance. The elderly man, however, remained composed. He set down his fork, took a sip of water, and then locked eyes with her. "Do you enjoy your job?" he asked suddenly, his deep voice cutting through the noise of the restaurant. Jessica scoffed. "It's just a job," she said, folding her arms. "Not all of us have the luxury of sitting around all day." The old man gave a small, knowing smile. Jessica had no idea she had just humiliated the owner of the restaurant. Jessica strutted toward the kitchen, still amused by her own arrogance, when she heard a sharp voice call her name. She turned to see her manager, Mr. Carter, storming toward her, his face pale and filled with panic. "Jessica, what did you just do?" he hissed, glancing nervously toward the VIP section. Confused, she frowned. "What do you mean?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I'm doing my job." Mr. Carter's eyes widened in horror. "That man," he whispered urgently, pointing toward the elderly gentleman still seated at the booth. is Clint Eastwood, the owner of this restaurant. Jessica's heart stopped. A wave of panic crashed over her as she replayed the past 10 minutes in her head. The sarcasm, the eye rolls, the careless service. She had just insulted one of the most legendary figures in Hollywood. Her stomach twisted into knots. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the restaurant now staring at her, whispers spreading like wildfire. Celebrities at nearby tables murmured in disbelief, a few even shaking their heads in disappointment. Her throat went dry. "You're joking, right?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Mr. Carter's expression didn't change. "No, Jessica, I'm not," he said, his tone deadly serious. "Clint Eastwood owns this place, and he's been known to personally check in on the service, unannounced." Jessica's knees felt weak. Her hands trembled as she looked back at the calm, collected man who had asked her if she enjoyed her job. As if sensing her gaze, Clint slowly turned his head, meeting her eyes. His face remained unreadable, but something in his expression sent a chill down her spine. He had known all along. Jessica had made the biggest mistake of her career, and there was no way to undo it now. Jessica stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as Clint Eastwood locked eyes with her. The weight of her mistake pressed down on her chest, making her dizzy. She had mocked him, dismissed him, and treated him like he was beneath her. Yet the entire time, he had remained calm, unshaken, fully aware of who he was and who she wasn't. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she waited for what came next. Would he demand that she be fired? Would Mr. Carter drag her into the office and tell her to pack her things? Just then, Clint Eastwood stood up. The restaurant fell into complete silence, the usual hum of conversation vanishing in an instant. Jessica's palms grew sweaty as she braced for the inevitable. Instead, Clint walked straight toward her, his boots clicking against the polished floor with deliberate steps. Every customer in the restaurant watched, their eyes darting between them like it was a scene in one of his legendary films. Stopping just inches from her, he tilted his head slightly and studied her face. "You judged me the moment I walked in," he said, his voice low yet powerful. "Dismissed me because of how I looked, treated me like I was nothing." Jessica swallowed hard, unable to find her voice. "But here's the thing, kid," Clint continued, his eyes narrowing. "You never know who you're talking to. A little respect goes a long way." Jessica's cheeks burned as shame flooded through her. She wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. Then, to her shock, Clint turned to Mr. Carter and said, "Give her another chance." Jessica's eyes widened. "What?" she blurted out before she could stop herself. Clint gave her a small smirk. "I believe in second chances," he said simply. "The question is, what will you do with yours?" Jessica couldn't believe what she had just heard. Instead of demanding her termination, Clint Eastwood had given her a second chance, a chance she didn't deserve. For the first time that night, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: humility. She had spent years believing she was too good for this job, too important to treat customers with kindness unless they were rich or famous. But now, standing before a legend who had just taught her a lesson in respect, she realized how wrong she had been. Determined to prove that she had learned from her mistake, Jessica transformed her attitude overnight. She arrived at work early, polished the silverware without being asked, and greeted customers with genuine warmth instead of forced politeness. When an elderly couple struggled to read the menu, she patiently explained each dish, offering recommendations with a smile. When a mother accidentally knocked over a drink while juggling her toddler, Jessica rushed over to help, reassuring her that it was no big deal. For the first time, she stopped seeing her job as a burden and started seeing it as an opportunity to grow, to improve, and to treat people the way she wished she had treated Clint that night. Weeks passed, and the change didn't go unnoticed. Customers left generous tips, co-workers began to respect her, and even Mr. Carter pulled her aside one evening. "I don't know what got into you," he said, "but keep it up. You're becoming one of our best servers." Then one evening, a familiar figure walked in, Clint Eastwood. Jessica's heart pounded as she approached his table, determined to make things right. She served him with care, treating him not as a celebrity, not as a restaurant owner, but as a valued guest. As she placed his meal before him, Clint looked up, his eyes twinkling. "Looks like you figured it out," he said with a knowing smile. Jessica had finally learned her lesson. As Jessica watched Clint Eastwood take a bite of his steak, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: pride in her work. For the first time, she wasn't just going through the motions, waiting for the day she could leave this job behind. Instead, she had learned to value every interaction, every moment, and every opportunity to treat people with kindness. Clint had given her a second chance, and she had taken it seriously. When he finished his meal, Jessica walked over to clear the table, her heart pounding. Before she could say anything, Clint placed the check on the table with a $1,000 tip folded neatly inside. Stunned, she looked up at him, her eyes wide. "This isn't just for the service," Clint said, his signature smirk appearing. "It's for the lesson you finally learned." Jessica swallowed hard, emotion welling up inside her. "Thank you," she said softly. No sarcasm, no attitude, just genuine gratitude. Clint tipped his hat, stood up, and walked toward the door. As he left, Jessica realized something. Respect isn't about wealth, fame, or appearances. It's about character. And that was a lesson she would never forget. In life, every interaction is an opportunity to learn, grow, and show respect. Just like Jessica, you never know who you're talking to or how your attitude might shape your future. Approach each moment with humility, kindness, and an open mind, because the way you treat people today could determine the opportunities you get tomorrow.